Everyone, and welcome to ADYE. We are going live with our discussion on health equity, systemic racism. Prior to our starting, we are going to hear a word from the president of ADYE, Ashton Dixon's mother, my sister Donna Dixon. Welcome, Donna Dixon.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to extend a warm welcome. Let's do that. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our special guests, Ottawa Councillor Glen Gower, Matthew Fleury, and Tim Turney, and a very warm welcome to our dynamic panelists. We have Talia Haywood, Nick Reynolds, Kwesi Otu, Jeff Coventry, Dante Djan, and Brandon Weeks. We are pleased to have the group of panelists who will be sharing their life experience with racism and discrimination. Too often, these topics have been either avoided or downplayed. Many Blacks and other people of color have had to deal with racism and discrimination at one point or another in their lives. Whether it was in school, at work, interaction with government officials, police, or strangers, and the list can go on. I also have many stories of how me and my family have had to live through racism and discrimination as well. We have had many negative encounters with school system, at work, and even with the police. It is not something you can easily forget or overcome. Not everyone has the strength to openly discuss the negative effects that racism and discrimination has had on their lives, and unfortunately, many suffer in silence.
All right, thank you very much, Donna Dixon. And this is going to be a really dynamic discussion. So before we start off, I'd like us to set some ground rules. We had decided that we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So rules for this session will be, we will be professional, we'll be considerate, no profanity, and no racist slurs. I'd also like to, at this point, open it up to anyone who wants to add maybe a rule that we haven't indicated that they thought would be good to include at this time as well. If someone is speaking, I cannot hear anyone speaking. If not, we will proceed. All right, with that being said, let's proceed. And we will start off the session with our first panelist.
Kwesi.
Kwesi Otu.
Yes, Kwesi Otu.
Go ahead, Kwesi.
You know, I came here thinking I was going to speak on the police, because that's a topic du jour, the police. But in the past, probably 10 years, the number of hate groups, and I can name them all, and I'm sure some of you know the names too, they are becoming more, I don't want to say dominant, but they're becoming more aggressive, they're becoming more vocal, and this whole concept of Canada, first of all, there's a concept of Canada is not racist at all. And then we understand that's just a myth, a lie. Then there's the conversation of, is Canada more covert with the racism versus the US, which is more overt? And in my experience, it's I won't say equal, but it's becoming very overt to me, in my experience. And it's not like going to the suburbs to visit somebody, or going to Manotick or something like that, or you move to Greeley and maybe they look at you funny. It's literally in your own neighborhood. It's literally the go back to Africa comments, whether or not you come from Africa. It's those kind of comments that then lead you to kind of investigate where is this coming from? And so I discovered, and I'm gonna say this first, that the Proud Boys are the hate group du jour, but the Proud Boys, all three of the Vice founders, the Vice magazine founders, either went to school or from Ottawa. So there is a connection to the Proud Boys in Ottawa that I don't think people talk about, and they are out and about. They're out and about, and they make their presence known sometimes at rallies, but they are a bit more quiet with their actions, I believe. They're not ready to full on, go all out and make a demonstration. So they're hate group number one. Hate group number two, Soldiers of Odin. All right. They are, like I said, out and about, and they are intimidating. The thing with these groups, they like to intimidate people who they think will not fight back. Similar to what we're seeing on the East Coast with the indigenous. It's that kind of dynamic. Soldiers of Odin, the base, which is located within the Canadian military. It's like a cell of white supremacists within the military. There is also, I wouldn't call bikers hate groups, but they're in there too. There is also the Northern Guard. There's also Atomwaffen, which was a West group, which is a Western Canada-based group, but I've learned that they made inroads into Ontario. So that's just a few. And there's more, but I'm not going to list them all. You know what I mean? So in my experience with the Black population or the minority population in general, what it is in Ottawa, it's challenging to try and go up against a supremacist system in which the police often defend these people. The police, I call them the foot soldiers of the system. Many of these groups, they're the foot soldiers. So that's how I view them. I might have gone over my 5 minutes.
All right.
All right, thank you very much. The next panelist to speak will be Talia Haywood.
Let me know if you guys can hear me. Can I get a thumbs up if you guys can hear me? Because I'm all the way in New Mexico. All right, perfect. So hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. I'm happy to be here. My name's Talia Haywood. I am Ashton's stepsister, actually. So I'm so honored to be here. Today, I guess, the discussion in systematic racism, my experiences are a little different. I was born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario. I lived there for a good 30 years of my life. And I recently, well, I say recently, I moved to the US about 8 years ago. I moved to San Diego and then just recently moved to Albuquerque. In that, living in Canada and going back to what Kwesi was saying in terms of the differences in racism within the US and Canada. So living in Canada, for me, my experience anyway, I didn't really experience racism until I was well into my teens. And the reason being, I believe the reason being at the time was because I grew up in a very culturally diverse environment. My father is from Guyana. My mother is Canadian, Irish, French descent. And my stepfather is from Nigeria. I grew up going to a Catholic school. My grandmother is Seventh-day Adventist. I had a plethora of cultural diversity within my background. So I always thought that I didn't experience racism because I was able to adapt to my environment. Part of my family is white. And so I just felt I fit in and I was able to adapt to my environment. So it wasn't until high school when I got pulled into the office because I had found some rings in the gym and someone saw me pick them up, and full intent to return them. I was told that I was stealing. And when I got called to the office, the principal made a comment about, well, you people do this sort of stuff. And I didn't quite understand what that meant at the time until, somebody had to point it out to me, which was, one of my family members, like, he was being straight up racist. And that's when I was like, well, I didn't quite understand I didn't quite understand. It took me a while to understand. Moving to the US, I had to have a deep conversation with my daughters. I visited the US plenty of times, but I had to have a really deep conversation with my daughters. I have 4 daughters, 23, 20, 18, 12, about the difference going out into your community from being in Ottawa to now being in San Diego. The racism in the US is bold, it's upfront. In Canada, I find it's a little bit subtle. My brother used the term polite, that the racism in the US is polite. They say it without saying it. Extreme microaggression. And here in the US, it is much different. You are blatantly called a nigger. You are blatantly told, because you are Black, you are different. And I had to have that conversation with my daughters, that they don't know what your background is. They see the color of your skin and the judgment is made, and that's final. And so you don't have time to explain that you come from a good home. You don't have time to explain that you are educated. You don't have time to explain who your mother is or who your father is. They see the color of your skin and you are judged immediately, so you have to act accordingly. And that's a terrible conversation to have with your children, to have that conversation with your children. And I didn't think I would ever have to, living in Canada, but I did. Have to have it moving to the US, and it's changing in Canada. It is getting a little bit more blatant in Canada. So I'm just glad we're having this discussion. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much, Talia.
I don't know. Can you hear me? Is there anything?
Yes, we could hear you. Can you hear me?
Any questions? Okay.
Talia, can you hear me? Okay. So I was saying, yes, I could hear you and I could relate because I too live in the US, and you are right on target. Fully understand this is not about me. This is about our panelists, but I can say I fully understand what you're talking about. I use the word subverse for racism in Canada, very subverse. All right, our next speaker will be Nick Reynolds.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicholas Reynolds. I can see a few of you on the screen, so Chone, Alex, Q, Jean-Michel. If you guys cannot hear me, can you wave? Because I'm gonna try and speak through this mask, okay? Thank you so much. So the first thing I'm gonna address is, just in an effort to challenge that opinion that racism isn't an issue in Ottawa or by extension Canada, I'm going to share a few of anecdotal experiences of my own, because I often find that when this discussion is being had, a lot of people like to dictate what my life's experiences have been, and you can't claim to know what I've been through if you haven't been through it yourself. Sorry, I'm trying to get my timer going here because I know I can talk for a while. So In elementary school, between the grades 4 and 6, I'm trying to narrow it down, I was called an N-word for the first time. So let that simmer for a bit. You can probably think of the impacts that will have on a child of that age when you got to go home and have that discussion with your parents. In the 9th grade, I was stopped by police in broad daylight, and I was told to essentially get in line with a bunch of other minority youths. And we were told that we know you guys have drugs on you. And they performed a street search right there in broad daylight, looking for drugs that they never found on us. And by the way, I'm picking and choosing here because I have dozens of these that I've gone through in my lifetime. My graduating year of high school, friends and I are in the mall area of our high school. A classmate of ours is entertaining us with magic tricks. We burst out into laughter. We enjoyed it. It was great. All of a sudden, we got faculty staff rushing in to break up a fight. It was just students laughing and having a good time. More significantly, in 2008, I believe it was, I had several guns drawn on me by the police. This was in Toronto. I was on my way home from a party that was just down the road from my house. I think it was the end of semester party or something like that. And basically a bunch of cop cars pulled up over the curb. There wasn't the red and blue cherries that you see on TV. These were spotlights and guns were drawn. I immediately complied. The first thing that came to mind was, the lessons that were taught in-house, because essentially we have, police mitigation drills that we go through in the house, because this is a real thing that can happen to us. And sure enough, I was faced with half a dozen guns. And I thought of the case of Amadei Diablo, I think at the time was one that was most prominent in my mind, because he was a young man that was shot to death in New York when he tried to show the police his proper identification. So unfortunately, I got to learn from that young man's tragedy, and I didn't reach for anything. And I simply became a large starfish, turned around and hugged the wall behind me. Several of my classmates, teammates at the time at York, they witnessed that. And I can say it was one of the more traumatizing and embarrassing experiences that I've had to endure. When everything was finally sorted out by the droves of students that came in protest for me, I was told to go home and not cause any more disturbances. I was on my way home. More recently in my adult life, regarding work, because systemic racism it's not just an issue that applies to police and their treatment of us. My former manager asked me if he could call me his N-word at work. I've been approached by the same manager at the urinal, as he made jokes about penis size as it pertains to stereotypes around Black males. I was told I was the whitest Black guy at work by the same manager. I was embarrassed in front of a room full of colleagues when I was told that I speak like a white person because I can articulate my thoughts, well, when it comes to speech, as opposed to, I guess, Black speech, which would be Ebonics. There's a bunch of others, but that brings me to my next point. So, when people in the workplace are faced with these kinds of challenges, you have to ask yourself now, is that a disgruntled worker or is that a fed up worker? And the inability to identify the distinction between the two, it's very frustrating, because if we are experiencing that kind of harassment at work by the authority figures, where do we go to with these complaints when it's our impression that everybody is in cahoots, so to speak? So that ultimately led me to leave that job in the private sector. So when someone in our community communicates racial discrimination, we're often told that we're playing the race card, or that we may be over exaggerating. This is a form of victim shaming that needs to be highlighted, okay? Because the poor responses or lack thereof responses make it so that victims like myself are reluctant to come forward, right? It's not just the George Floyds of the world that have these things impact them. There are a lot of instances that happen on a daily basis, okay, in the most casual of environments that don't make the news cycle, okay? I'll bring that up in our discussion later on. Also, we have to take a look at the framing that we use. The term African American or African Canadian, it just further highlights that, apparently I'm some subsection of Canadian citizens. I'm a Canadian, and I don't see my white counterparts have to endure the same kind of framing and labeling.
Right, right. Yes.
When it comes to media coverage, we got to look with a really critical eye at the way in which crime is being racialized. I did a quick search today and I saw that 3 homicides that were reported in Ottawa this year, okay, of those 3, 2 had Black males as the suspects. Their pictures were prominently projected or put on the front page of that article online, or be it in the newspaper. I saw it via my computer screen. The third turned out to be a white male. I only found out that he was a white male because it turned out that this suspect was accused of murdering his own father. So it was when I found out the funeral arrangements and the details of that, I was able to confirm that in fact this suspect was a white male. So when you put a face to crime and that face looks like mine, what it does is it makes my life that much harder, the life of my peers that much harder, and the life of my son and the subsequent generations that much harder. So we have to look at the subtle nuances to systemic racism, because it's not as overt as the media that likes to portray the tragedies that are happening right now. For example, in the United States, that's not necessarily what's killing us. Because if you know that there's a manhole in your path to where you're walking, you can avoid it. If you don't know it's there, you might fall in, you might hurt yourself. So the racism that we're not aware of, the racism that's not overt, is the kind of racism that will impact us the greatest, because that's an enemy that we can't fight because we don't know that enemy exists. I have a ton more. I don't know if I should get back to it on the back end, or
If we have a chance, we can revisit that. I know we want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So thank you very much, Nick. I agree with all that you had to say. It's very, very important that subversive racism is definitely something we want to look at and address. And we all have our story. Jeff Coventry is next.
Hey guys, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, please. Thank you. Just give me a quick thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of a high school teacher, grade 7 and 8 teacher, who has studied, has a major in history, and actually studied the slave trade and the ideas of triangular trade in his studies. I'm also going to talk about the curriculum and the Canadian curriculum from its perspective to Canadian history, as well as its lack of African history and Black history, for that matter. So ending systemic racism and achieving equality, justice, and fairness for all Canadians begins by inviting open dialogue that leads to learning and sharing the truth about our past. Racism in Canada, both past and present, is well documented as an undeniable fact. We are less aware of the history of racial injustice in Canada because we don't talk about it. It is profoundly important that we learn our history and be acutely aware of our individual and collective wrongs if we are to move ahead as a society. We can't judge our neighbors until we have dealt with our own challenges. We know undeniably that history is written from the perspective of the victors. As an educator, it is extremely disconcerting to find that we are quick to create heroes, and yet often find when presented with so-called historical facts, our history textbooks are in fact suspect, and fail to include that Canada has a dark past that promoted privilege and allowed some to benefit tremendously from systemic inequality. We are continually led to believe the narrative that Canada, as a racist society, is in opposition to the mainstream notion of our Canadian identity and values. Sound familiar? But historically untrue. As activist Desmond Cole observes with great insight and accuracy, Canada needs to overcome its own mythology as a country. That we don't have the same forms of racism as our neighbors in the United States. Curriculum in schools is often incomplete or politically correct at the expense of the truth. Fact, our Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, when presented in his complex entirety, is the architect of both Confederation and the Indian Act. Both of these historical realities are inextricably bound and critical to understanding him, our history, and our country. Fact, McGill University, one of Canada's most respected post-secondary institutions, had a history of anti-Semitic admissions policies that were not lifted until after World War II. Fact, the Chinese head tax, first introduced in 1885, increased several times thereafter, discouraged and penalized Chinese immigration to Canada. It was superseded by the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1923, which forbade Chinese immigration altogether. Fact, in my own findings, I have been surprised that while teaching Black History Month in February, many students were unaware that the town of Africville in Halifax, Nova Scotia, was expropriated in the 1960s. Homes were torn down without warning and processed as the community was displaced and homes were permanently demolished. Fact, the UN, as recently as 2017, in their working group of experts of people of African descent, released a report on its mission to Canada that Canada's history of enslavement, racial segregation, and marginalization of African Canadians has left a legacy of anti-Black racism and has a serious impact on people of African descent. Stating this must be addressed in partnership with the affected communities across Canada. As a result, many people of African descent continue to live in poverty and poor health, have limited access to educational attainment, and are overrepresented at all levels of the criminal justice system. As a teacher, it is my calling to help students share, talk, and teach about Canada's history of racial injustice, systemic racism, and its legacy. My students often ask me, well, how do we start to create change? I often tell them that communication is good, but it's not good enough. Comprehension of the truth is required to catalyze change. History lessons need to be accurate, and truth needs to out. Injustice. Liberation for all will not arise without the lies of some. Dismantling the past is paramount. If that past is inaccurate and harmful to the present, then the narratives need to be adjusted. As Martin Luther King Jr. profoundly stated, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I invite you to work with me in making this shift. Conversation must become action. Action means engagement, whether it's through volunteerism or classroom engagement. Participation is the bedrock of change. Ask the youth around you what their passions and interests lay, and encourage them to pursue those interests toward actionable change. Encourage young minds to volunteer, participate in discourse, in politics, in business endeavors, in artistic and creative activities. Let's face it, people in the Black community will concur that we are tired of this conversation and want to experience actionable change. But that's because we have been having these conversations among ourselves for generations. For the first time, this past year, we've seen our efforts amplified and expanded to the world stage. Actionable change is coming. Engagement is happening in many communities outside of our own for the very first time, and it is fostering real conversations such as this one. For the wider communities who have been insulated by choice or by accident, this past year has visibly exposed the world to comprehension and depth of the festering sores of anti-Black and systemic racism. There are no excuses or rocks to hide under or ignorances to claim any longer. So I say to you and my students, change comes with comprehending that meaningful conversations must extend beyond the month of February. No one makes a basketball team having exclusively attended summer camps. Meaningful transition will not happen with a continuation of Black History Month only responses. What we do, it will be what we do between March and January that amplifies the pace and penetration of meaningful movement. And so to all of you, despite us knowing the issues, I implore you to have compassion and invite new people into the conversation. Based on my experience with youth who have been insulated from their own truths, you cannot make assumptions that they already know the truth. Many are truly hearing our message for the first time. Ending systemic racism and achieving equality, justice, and fairness for all Canadians begins with continued conversations that lead to comprehending and sharing the truth about our past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. As a communication major, I will say that you did a great job of communicating your message. And as a teacher, I will add that yes, education is very important, and what is taught to students in schools is equally as important. And what they experience outside is partially based on what they learn inside, because they learn what to tolerate from what not to. So thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Dante Djan. If I said your name correctly, I hope I did not.
Dante Djan, that's correct. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Dante.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd just like to say thank you for having me. I think these things are really important to have and kind of keep the message going. And it's important. I know it gets redundant having these talks and everything, but it's really important to creating change. So just a little bit of me. So I attended St. FX. I play on the football team out there. Ashton was a close friend of mine. We lived together my last year. So I'm just going to touch on kind of example of what I had with racism, kind of how it affected my life. I think like all of us, we all have these incidents, that we face every day growing up. Some of them have more effect on us than others. And a lot of them, just kind of, for me, kind of went under the rug and didn't have too much of an effect on me. And I said, you know what, that's just kind of is what it is. But I'm going to kind of touch on one that really opened my eyes and kind of, talk about how it affected me. Just a little background on me. So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, to a mixed race family. My mom's white, my dad's black. My parents both did a good job at kind of telling me about the things I was going to face in my life. Growing up as a black child, you're going to face these certain things. People are going to look at you a certain way. But, you hear those things, but you don't really acknowledge it or, see it till you really go through it and you say, wow, whether it was, playing, I played hockey growing up, whether it's on the ice, someone calling you the N-word. Or, I went to a school that's predominantly white and people calling you the N-word there, you're facing things there. But, one thing that really affected me, I grew up playing football and that's kind of who I was as a person. I was really good at football. I was good in school. And it was in high school, it was my grade 12 year. And we just won we won a big game going on to the to the city final. And, we were on the news that night. They actually did an article about me that night, and I was feeling good. All my family was there. We went out for a big family dinner, and it was really a high point in my young career, and I was feeling good, So that night, my dad let me take his car out with a couple of my boys who were also black kids, and we went out to a little party, and then after the party, we were out at a McDonald's grabbing some food, and we're just sitting there, enjoying the good night, talking about our future, where we're gonna go to university and everything. And then boom, 2 cop cars pull up on us, guns drawn, and we're getting shouted at to get out of the car. So obviously, like my heart drops. We get out, we're trying to explain ourselves. They're telling us to shut up, get on the ground. And I just remember laying on the ground, and it's like in McDonald's at probably like 8 p.m. and there's all these people looking at us and just looking down at us with like disgust. And I think, that's the first thing that really hit me is like kind of looking up at all these people and say, their idea of me, you know what I mean? And the way that they just assumed, I did something. I remember sitting there, and then so the cops came and they put the zip ties on our wrists, and we're sitting there and we're trying to explain ourselves, and we're being told to shut up. I remember we went to roll around, and the people watching us saying, officers, they're moving, stay down. And these are people that don't even know us. It's people that don't know me. They don't know who I am. And that's why I really opened my eyes and was able to see, this is how people view us. This is how society views us. That really is that idea of, you're guilty until proven innocent. And I think that's what we really have to walk around with as black people. And it's not fair, but it's the reality. So soon, 20 minutes later, another cop comes and they let us go. And then, so we're sitting there for an explanation, and they say, oh, well, your car matched the details of something. Apparently there was somebody got beat up real bad or something like that. We later saw on the news, there's actually 3 white kids that did it that ended up getting arrested. And it didn't really hit me. Like, we got back in the car, and I remember sitting there with my friends, and we just kind of tried to laugh it off. But I remember that night, it really kind of sat in with me. And you know what? I sat there and I was like, kids, is this really who people think I am? And ever since then, you know, it walks with you, and you have that idea of kind of who people are when you walk in a room or when you walk in a store. You know what I mean? Like, I think about that now when I'm wearing a hoodie or I have my dreads out and I'm wearing a hat. People are gonna automatically assume the worst. They're not going to think I'm some person that's, you know what I mean, as a quarterback that's had success at all levels of university, university graduate that's heavily active in the community. They're going to assume the worst, right? And really, it's something that I've had to carry. And, you know what I mean, in every room I go into, I kind of have to do the most to prove to people who I am, which, you know what I mean, I feel like a white kid or somebody else white in my situation doesn't have to. You know what I mean? It's automatically assumed that they're this type of great person. So, you know what I mean? I think these things are really important, and you know, to share our stories, and you know what I mean, like tons of people are doing this, but we really got to keep on pushing. And so am I going over the time?
Sorry, I'm just trying to keep things on track. You're fine.
Yes, yeah, I'll wrap up. But yeah, that just kind of had an effect on me, and I feel like that's a lot of this through their lives, and you know, that notion of we really got to prove who we are, and the notion of, you know, you're guilty until proven innocent. So.
Homeowners are raving about Leaf Filter, the proven solution that ends gutter cleaning forever.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Press the wrong button and then something goes off that shouldn't go off. Thank you very much, Dante. The next person is my sweet nephew, Brandon Dixon. I won't call you what I called you when you were young. Go ahead, Brandon Dixon.
So yeah, my name's Brandon Dixon, Brandon Weeks.
Brandon Weeks Dixon.
You guys all hear me?
Yeah, you might want to raise your voice just a little, but yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I was just filling in for one of our panelists who couldn't make it tonight. So I'm just gonna talk about a couple of experiences that I had growing up. From our panelists that are here right now, 3 of us grew up in Ottawa South in the 2000s, where swarmings were the norm at South Keys. 2 of us went to St. Pat's, another one went to Hillcrest. So with that, I'm gonna talk about the simple fact of growing up in Ottawa South in a decent neighborhood. But then before we got there, we grew up in Trappers Park. I live with my father near Ledbury, so you're surrounded by, if you don't know the city, Ledbury, Walkley is like kind of, you're underneath, down at the bottom of a hill by a creek, where you're just someone's piece of trash, and they're trying to like hide you from the regular eye. Across the street or up the hill, there's these phenomenal bungalows and nice houses. I'm gonna tie that into the systemic racism of they wanna hide in Canada their racism. That project and that area is predominantly visible minorities. A lot of Blacks, a lot of Latinos. There's some white people there, but they're not the norm. So growing up, we went to St. Pat's, and with Trappers, it was the same thing. Trappers Park, right in the middle, there's Equusway, Pimlico, Trappers, and then you have Albion and Rosabella, Kingsdale, Queensdale, where now these are all $1 million homes, and you gotta look at things that you can't have. I went to a school where we were only 3 Black kids in the entire school. I went to St. Bernard, there was myself and 2 others. I was the darkest of the 3. Where you guys are gonna think, oh, it's not that bad. Like, being the darkest person, you are the first person to be called the N-word. You are the first person that they're gonna come to and say, you're the problem, no matter what happens. I fit the description in high school a dozen times, and that could be in the span of 3 days. It's not throughout my high school career. So an experience for me that affected me deeply and kind of changed the way I view police was with another panelist here in high school. We had finished a football practice in Canada at the Osdome. Drove from Canada all the way to the South End No police bothered us, nothing. We were minding our business. Still have our stinky equipment in the trunk of the car. We go see a friend, another friend comes over, and we're like, oh, we're gonna pick up someone from South Keys and come back. We get to South Keys, and I kid you not, I'm turning right into where the cinemas are. Before I can even get to the stop sign to turn to South Keys, and we see like 6 cop cars drive by. We're like, shit, what happened? In the car talking amongst ourselves. By the time I get to the stop sign, I didn't even make it to South Keys. We were surrounded by those 6 cars and another 4 to 5 that were following suit. The joke is 3 of us are black and there's 1 white kid in the car. And I'm gonna say it's a joke because at that point in time, I'm thinking, okay, well, did I forget to signal? Did I do something? And we're talking about it. I was like, no, we didn't do anything. I comply, they come, I give them my license. We just had cell phones. The blue screen came out with TELUS, so like, that was a cool thing then. That's making light of the situation, right? When I look back on it, it's like, they really thought we did something. So now when these officers pull us out of the car, they separate the 3 black guys and they tell the young white guy to go home.
Oh.
We're standing here, 16 years old, thinking like, what did we do? We just came from your house. And we're telling them we just came from their house. We just came from football, like our stuff in the trunk, you're gonna see it. We picked him up. Why are we being detained and he's being set free? You guys did something at this area. We were nowhere near there. But he can say he didn't do it and you're gonna let him go? That's what blew my mind. I was like, wow. I'm 16 years old getting arrested for an assault charge.
They didn't tell us it was assault.
No, they didn't tell us it was an assault, but the next day they did. I'll get to that point. We're getting arrested for no reason, right? Like my mom came, his mom came, the other kids' parents came. And they're trying to figure out, why are you arresting our kids? They couldn't tell them why they're arresting us. You can make it to the Elgin police station and you'll find out. We sat in cells for 12 hours before we spoke to a detective. At 16 years old, they put us in a cell and gave us ham sandwiches and old chocolate milk. Oh, well, and the joke was with the guy going by, oh, it's Friday, you guys missed the McDonald's. What? I missed McDonald's? Like, I'm a regular and I'm always here and I should know this. 16 years old. For the next day to sit down and go through one by one, not knowing like when we're all gonna be coming out, to come out and you see, okay, well, one of us made it out. The other one made it out. Our one white friend is there with his parents in support because he's attesting to that we weren't there. They believed him so much. He lives on the other side of Uplands. He lived down on a street where it's a cul-de-sac and there's no OC Transpo, it's private, it's quiet. It's where you want to, it's what you want to get to at this point in life for most people. But at 16 years old, he went through the same trauma we did. After that, it was just my entire opinion towards police were, no matter what I say, they're not gonna believe me. No matter how I conduct myself, they're gonna detain me because they're gonna see my address, they're gonna see my skin tone, and they're gonna group me into the same group of these other kids who are doing things that we weren't. Just off of address and skin. That's the systemic racism. I live in this area, I do this, I go here, I'm gonna get arrested. Even now as an adult, when I drive around and I look, I can be in Orleans driving past 10 cops, they won't pay attention to me. As soon as I hit the split and I go towards work, they wanna pull up behind me, they wanna drive beside me and look in the car, and then they see my uniform or they see where I work and they're like, oh, okay, and they go about their business. That's something that I realized till this day. I live in a nice area. I'm going to another nice area, but it's known to have young Black criminals. So no matter whatever Black guy I see in whatever car it may be, he's a criminal. I've gone over my time. That's just what I wanted to say today.
It's in front of everyone in our community too. One of our coaches saw that happening. Saw us getting arrested.
There was over 100 people in that parking lot at Walmart, because this was before Walmart was how big it was now, when they used to have the bikes and everything outside. And people were hiding. The guy who called the police was hiding behind the tree saying it's them, them, and them. The next day, the detective's like, oh, well, yeah, you guys weren't there and this and that. There was no apology. There was no charges brought against that person. The crazy thing is, that person's a lawyer now.
I got to bring this up because it was one of my points. And obviously we're dealing with time limitations. But one thing that stood out for me in that particular occasion, because there have been several. If you don't understand at this point, I was there. When we got back to school, the administration pulled us all together because they knew it was a serious incident, obviously. And then they had the police constable there talk to us and tell us that, listen, guys, we know you're ticked off and we know you want to take action because we want to beat him up. Like just 100%, we want to beat that guy up, okay? And they told us that we cannot act on it because they're going to charge him with 6 counts of criminal mischief. And if we go off and attack that young man, then we're going to ruin our chances of seeing those charges being laid. A week later, sorry, there's sirens in the background, so distracted. A week later, we were all contacted and told that they dropped those charges because he was just a young kid that made a mistake. We were young kids that didn't even make a mistake, but we got to see the inside of a jail cell and had to sleep there overnight. I refused to eat that food. I refused to drink their chocolate milk or whatever because I didn't belong there. But that wasn't the first time and it wasn't the last time that I've seen the inside of a jail cell. And I have no criminal record to date. I have seen several jail cells in my lifetime, and I don't have a criminal record. And yet I hear people say things like, you're making it up or you're playing the race card. This thing is real, it exists. And it's trauma that we have to live with every day of our lives. I have altered the way in which I travel through society because I am trying to minimize the chances of me having interaction with police. Now I understand that there are many, in fact, the majority of police officers are out there to do the right thing. But I'll tell you what, the police officers are out there doing the right thing that don't step up and say something when they know something bad is going on, okay? You have a part to play in that. I don't care if there's this blue shield that you're supposed to adhere to because your primary responsibility is to serve the people in the community. And you're not serving us if you're silent on these issues. I can talk for days on my personal experiences with racism as it pertains to law enforcement or authority figures at work or whatever. We don't have time for that. And you know what? You guys, quite frankly, would be tired of hearing it by the end. And I'm tired of experiencing it. And I do not wish that for anybody, including my son, going forward.
Good point, Nick. What we're going to do is we're going to transition. We're going to have one more speaker, and then we're going to open the floor for questions because I think personally, every single Black man, Black woman, Black child, every single individual, doesn't matter the shade that they are, can tell you some experience that they've experienced with regards to racism. So we have to move towards the solution. We don't need to dwell on our experiences. So before we move into discussing solutions, we're going to ask Mr. Glen Gower to step up. Yeah, I hope I said your name correctly.
You did. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Councillor Glen Gower, and I represent Stittsville Ward in the west part of Ottawa. And I want to thank all the panelists for sharing their experiences. I think it was Dante who apologized at the start and said, I hope this isn't redundant. It's not redundant. It's as long as we have racism continuing in our communities, it's really important that we keep hearing and understanding your stories and experiences. Here in Stittsville, just a few weeks ago, we've had a thing that started this summer where a number of residents started a sign campaign, lawn signs around Black Lives Matter. And there are a couple of hundreds of signs out around the community, but these signs have been stolen in some cases. They've been vandalized in some cases. There was a anonymous letter writer who was sending some very intimidating letters to people who had these signs on their lawns. Anyhow, but it's a reminder that there's blatant racism in our community still, and it's something that we all need to confront and to tackle. I would say racism, and in particular anti-Black racism right now, is at the forefront of a lot of conversations at City Hall, certainly around the police, but also around things like equity, anything where equity applies, which is pretty much anything we do at the city, transportation, social services. Certainly it's front and center in our public health conversations. We're seeing that racialized communities are disproportionately represented in the number of COVID cases in our community. If that's not clear evidence of systemic racism, I don't know what is. So I want to thank everyone for all the panelists for sharing their stories, for everyone who's tuned in to listen today, for all of the volunteers who work to keep the legacy of Ashton alive. What you're doing is very important, and I want you to know that we are listening at City Hall and working hard to find solutions and to move forward. So I'm looking forward to this next part of the conversation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman. Our next question as we transition, I have to admit that whenever we get into these types of conversations, personally, I don't think I'm alone in this. I think we all feel some emotion growing within us, because if you've experienced it, it's very challenging to listen to someone else go through a similar encounter. And if you haven't experienced it, to hear that someone has to go through something like that, it jolts you. But sometimes we have to have these very uncomfortable conversations to see something change. I am a licensed minister, and some might say, ooh, you're treading on some waters and maybe you shouldn't be talking like that. Well, the reality is this: there are events that have occurred in life that are unfair, unjust, unright. And Jesus died for all it, and this is not a sermon session, but there is something that is needed. My Lord and Savior looks upon all men as equal. He loves us all. And he created us to be equal. He didn't create one man to be better than another. And that's what he instructs. So with this mindset, I want us to go, and we do have some questions, but I want us to have some healthy conversation of what is equitable, what is fair, what is just, and what is right. We talk about systemic. That means there's a system that has been put into play. In the US, right here in Providence, there is a system where it's a school to prison pipeline. And I didn't grow up with that in Ottawa, but I know that there were young men that were targeted. I know I experienced it in elementary school. 2 guys call me nigger, and I turn around and I fight with them. I'm 6 or 7? And who gets in trouble? Me? So, these are not nice things that happen to people, but it's reality, so we can't ignore it. So with this being said, I'm going to come up with, I have some questions, and they weren't directed at anyone in particular, but I'm going to ask Brandon if you could address this first one. Someone stated, and the question is, what are the key I understand systemic racism as a system that is founded upon policies, practices, and legislation that is inherently biased in favor of another group, usually the more dominant or powerful group in the society. And here's the question. There was actually 3 questions that stemmed out of this. In the city of Ottawa, or wherever you live, what examples of systemic racism jump out? All right, I mentioned one. Can we think of some other examples of systemic racism? Systems that have been set in place that jump out at us, that show examples of racism, that systemic racism.
I'm reading the questions again.
So Brandon, did you hear me?
Yeah, I'm just reading the question from here.
Okay.
I'll jump in as Brandon reads it, because I did prepare some points in that regard as well. So, for example, I did bring it up very briefly earlier, media coverage. Media coverage and, racializing crimes that are committed by people of visible minority communities. Okay, so I did come up with that example earlier, but there's another one. This July 17th of 2020, there were 2 Sun Media news stories that were reporting on 2 separate police officers that I guess were acquitted of charges or were found to not have any wrongdoing. I don't think there were charges necessarily laid. I think one resulted in a broken arm, and the other, I don't remember what the result was, but they were both found not to have culpability in these cases. The image of the Black officer was posted. The shield, the police crest of the non-visible minority officer was not posted on the Sun Media website. But they're both timestamped for July 17th, 2020, same day. Why is that? So I think that what we need to do is, as a collective community, recognize these nuances to what we are calling systemic racism, and recognize those little things, those little aspects of reporting the news that depict us in a negative light on a consistent basis, because that contributes to the whole big black boogeyman kind of rhetoric that you got from Birth of a Nation decades and decades ago. And we need to let that go. So we need to have a more informed populace that understands that when information is being disseminated upon us, we have to recognize what they're doing with it. Personally, I actively watch commercials because I want to know what advertisers are doing to try to manipulate me to get my business, right? Is it an appeal to emotion? Is it an appeal to logic? You want to be aware of those unconscious factors in the background. And I think that media depiction of crime and the racializing of it is definitely something that contributes to systemic racism, and that needs to be reevaluated.
I could even jump in from a curricular situation, from a historical perspective, very much as you said, how it's depicted and whatnot in the media. It could be the same thing as how it's depicted in our textbooks and how we see things from a textbook side. I know us growing up in the mid-2000s, going to high school in the mid-2000s, I can guarantee you that the amount of pages that did not include Black history or the perspective of the Black loyalists or any of these people who founded societies in Canada were not included or were not discussed during Confederation, pre-Confederation, as well as the precursors to World War I and II. It's not enough right now to just say, oh, well, Black people played a part as soldiers. Black people played a part as people who farmed land. Black people owned land. What kind of land did they own? What were their jobs? Who were these people? There are stories there. There are history there to be discovered. One of my friends, Jordan, is married to a wonderful half-Black woman named Penny Cromwell, and her parents own, or her grandparents are the owners of the New Brunswick Museum for African Canadian History. And absolutely. And these people will tell you that there's more history in the East Coast of Canada towards Black Canadians or just Afro-Canadians, whatever we want to be called, then you can shake a stick at. There is more factual evidence of Black people founding the East Coast of Canada from a modern perspective than what is depicted in our textbooks today. I can't go off on exact examples. I don't have them offhand, but I've gone to these sites. I've visited these sites. I've spoken with these people in Halifax as well as in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I can begin to tell you that there is more to our story than just being a sideshow.
Thank you very much. So we did have 3 questions with that, but prior to proceeding, I want to give a response by one of our guests in the chat. The response was, there's an overrepresentation of racialized students in school suspensions, special education services, and underrepresentation in some programs like immersion. Systemic racism in the education system. So I think that's a very good example. I grew up, we were born in Jamaica, raised in Canada. And so I came very young. So I started 4-year-old kindergarten because I came young. But my older brother and older sister were automatically, they wanted to put them behind. My niece came from Jamaica. They wanted to put her behind. So the education system in Canada likes to try and say, oh, you come from another country.
I have a question.
Let's put down. All the questions need to be written in the chat, please.
Shut the fuck up.
Okay.
Cut him off. Cut him off.
Trying to find him. He left.
It's just muted.
He's still there.
Yeah.
He's muted.
Thank you. Yeah. We don't need that.
I mean, that comment though kind of speaks volumes to part of the issue that we're facing. There's not enough people that are taking these issues seriously. Like, I mean, obviously you could probably tell by my tone that I don't have any more patience for this. You know, I'm upset when I think about it, when I have to recall my experiences. So individuals like that, that don't take these issues seriously, they're a big problem, a big part of the problem that we're facing today.
I think, if I can speak, I think part of the problem too is being a minority, especially in Ottawa. There's almost this idea of, you know what, let me stay out of the way and do my business so I don't get in trouble. And so when things start to get a bit more overt, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. You get ready for war. Like, I've read any comment in public, I have something to fire back. And it's sometimes it goes further. I mean, that's not to incite or encourage violence, but sometimes it gets to that. Like, it's either you or them. So, another thing, that South Ottawa stigma, I lived in New Brunswick for 6 years. They know South Ottawa out in the East Coast because of all of these sorts of things. The so-called high crime, the police arrests, the depiction of, oh, all these minorities in the South Side are doing this, that, and the third. And then in Calgary, I don't know if y'all remember. Pardon me?
Keep going.
Okay. You remember when everybody went out to Alberta in like 2004 and 5? A lot of Southsiders went out there too. Raised a bit of hell. So it became this like national thing where these people from South Ottawa are going, going across the country and and causing problems. So I go out and live in the East Coast for 6 years, and I'm hearing about this, and I'm thinking, this is how this neighborhood, or not neighborhood, this area of Ottawa is depicted in this way, and Ottawa is depicted as safe. Problem. Problem. One more thing. The way Black and Indigenous are treated in the mental health crisis. The other day, there was, well, not the other day, there was Regis Koschinsky-Paquette in Toronto. There was Chantal Moore. I've been marching all week. They've been listing the names year after year after year. Black person, mental health crisis, ends in death. Indigenous person, mental health crisis, ends in death. And I'll open up a bit here. I had 2 of those exact scenarios this year. There was one Good Samaritan who called OC Transport cops. They got me to the hospital. Other person was my mom. And I remember the other day after, who was it? See, there's so many cases now. I think it was after the cops for Regis were found not guilty of murdering her. I texted my mom, like, yo, thanks for not calling the cops, because the way she described it, I was so agitated and aggravated. If cops had shown up, it would have been shots fired. So I think of these things and I'm thinking, you know, we don't even get the representation we need in the mental health system. You know what I mean? Hey, mental health is a big topic. Oh, there's all these Instagram posts and mental health is so important. Anxiety, talk to somebody, blah, blah, blah. And then in the end, what happens?
And again, relating to what you're saying to the school community, when we were talking about mental health and what you were saying, Ms. Moderator there, a lot of reasons we're not doing a good enough job for our BIPOC community in the schools is the reality is the people that are taking care of the mental health side of things, as well as the people that are in our schools to have these conversations, you know, student resource and all that stuff. These are people who have not sustained or even had the same type of life that any of us have experienced. They are not shared experiences. They can't really relate to these people. So, and us as people. The reality is there needs to be more representation for mental health within the BIPOC community and within schools. When I go into my classroom and I go into my school, the reality is I'm again a minority. If I go into student services or I go into the admin office, once again, I'm a minority. So the truth becomes that when we get into situations that are about depression, anxiety, all of these things, we do not have the same support systems within our schools that the white community does, because we don't have those people to relate with. I can't really go and talk to my colleagues truly about what it feels to be half Black, what it feels to be mixed race. And I've gone through anxiety, I've gone through depression, I've done that stuff. But the reality is, the truth is, until I have somebody in that room or in that community, that school community, that I know I can trust and has had similar, not the same, similar experiences to me, then they'll truly never understand me. And I'm not saying that you can't relate with me and be empathetic. But the truth is, there are just differences to growing up Black, biracial, Indigenous, and then there are to be white and have privilege. And that's just the truth for mental health in that case, in the school community.
And just to piggyback on mental health, beyond diagnosed mental health issues, there's also the mental health impact that repetitive trauma in your community will have on you. What I mean by that is trying to determine what route home will have, you know, the least amount of, let's say, police presence, so that you can go home and not have to worry about, you know, a shakedown or whatever it is. having to try and navigate a workplace where the authority figures harbor biases, either conscious or unconscious, and having to know when to shut your mouth and when it's appropriate to speak up, the latter being almost never. It's a really difficult balancing act, and it causes me, at least, anxiety on a daily basis. I recall talking to one of my friends just ahead of the pandemic, and he had come to my house, and he was really loud, and we were outside just chatting and gesticulating and whatnot, and I was really nervous, and I had to explain to him, look, I don't need my neighbors painting me or putting me into this little box of stereotype. So I'm consciously aware of the way that I'm conducting myself in public, because to relate it back to a former job of mine, we used to have this huge floor in which literally 100+ people could be on the floor at any given time. And, per the last census, I think it says that 3.5% of Canadians identify as Black. Let's just round it up to 4. So that means that if there's a room full of 100 Canadians now, okay, in this huge workplace that I used to work in, the averages say there's 4 Black people in there. Now, unfortunately, I put this tremendous amount of pressure on myself. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but sometimes I feel like the ambassador to Black people want to know. Because I know that there's so many Canadians that have so little interaction with Black people, I'm like, you got to be on your game when you step out of your house. And that's stressful, man. It's really stressful, feeling that you're always being watched based on your lived experiences, right? So that does have a mental health impact, whether you're aware of it or you're not. So I would, invite everyone, like whether or not you're part of the visible minority community or not, but everyone just, find someone to talk to, be it a mental health professional, confide in your friends or whatever, because you got to sort these issues out, because it will affect you in your relationships. It will affect you at work. It will affect you. It will limit your ability to succeed in life. And that's just something that I know. Obviously Black people aren't a monolith. I can't speak for everyone, but I know that's something that I deal with on a daily basis. And it's not fair. So I have, a tremendous support system around me that I can rely on when these demons come up.
Nick, thank you for saying that. And it is important that we are able to get to a place where we understand who we are and we can value who we are and not be stigmatized by the injustices in our world. There are times, yes, we do need to speak to someone we know, develop a core group, but we also want to see solutions set in place. It's not just about Black people feeling uncomfortable about being Black. There is a need for people to understand that this lifestyle is not necessarily the best for everyone, right? People don't need to walk around feeling fearful. So someone pointed out that, in the education system, and I don't want to stick on the education system, but that was one system that we know is systemic. Even with guidance counselors in Ottawa, I know I didn't get guidance from any of my guidance counselors when I was in grade 7 or grade junior high or high school, not even in university. So let's look at moving from the educational system into the public monies, and to see how maybe there are things that we could set. I like to say here in the US, they talk about, defunding the police. I think that's a bunch of nonsense. It's important to retrain and set standards for how police need to de-escalate a situation and treat individuals, right? So there is ways in which monies need to be spent. Let's talk about what type of programs, what types of changes do we really need? Because do we want mental health professionals to get popular within the community so that, individuals who are being minoritized can go and communicate with them? Or do we want to see changes? Not to say that it's not a good idea, but what are the ideas out there that we want to see? This is something we really should be discussing, because if you want to make change, what are the key factors that are needed to see change? Because we could sit here and talk about what happened to you, what happened to me, and we're not going to go anywhere with just talking about what happened to us.
I mean, as it pertains to law enforcement, I think that the individuals policing the communities should be a fair representation of the communities that they're policing. So we're talking about Ottawa South. I grew up in Ottawa South. If you don't know what it's like to grow up in Ottawa South, if you don't understand the dynamics between different ethnic groups, what happens at the basketball court, people just hanging out trying to get a slushie on a summer day or whatever it is. I'm serious, because I was because I was rolled up on by cops just for getting a slushie and pizza on one occasion, right? If you don't understand how we live our lives in our communities, how are you truly going to help us? Because you're always looking from the outside in. So I think that we need more people in uniform that represent their communities, because at the end of the day, I really, really wanted to be a police officer a few years ago. And, unfortunately, the idea is started to erode in my head, because, I'm seeing these stories come up, we get a black police chief, great. And then he's coming under heavy scrutiny by, union reps or what have you. There's memes being circulated within the Ottawa Police Service that depict black or primarily minority officers as a problem, right? That is systemic in itself. So I think that if you want to have people growing up in my shoes today feel a positive association with law enforcement, then get people from those communities onto the police force. They need to help the people within their communities. They know what these people are going through. I used to run a summer camp when I was in Toronto. It was a sports camp. And beyond, the basketball skills and stuff like that we're teaching these individuals, I can relate to them. I understood where they were coming from. I grew up with a single parent who did a fabulous job, by the way, amazing job. But I understand the difficulties of growing up in that kind of household, right? I understand what it feels like to be perceived as something other than you're not, right? So if you can get police officers in the community that come from the community, that can reach out to these young people, make them feel more comfortable, then I think that will start to move us in a positive direction. But it'll be baby steps, but nonetheless, it's still steps forward.
I think we also need to understand that Ottawa is an ever-changing landscape. We are no longer the 1990s Ottawa, where we were 90% white and 10% BIPOC. If you look at Orleans, if you look at Manotick, if you look at Stittsville, these communities are now ever growing into multicultural communities. I know for a fact when I went to high school there, my father being department head of arts, he's a man from South Africa, told me, blatantly, you're going to be one of the maybe 5 biracial kids at 2 tables in the lunchroom, And that was the truth. There was 2 tables of black kids and the rest were white. And then now, he just retired about 5 years ago. He told me when I came back to visit, he said, our community has changed. St. Peter's, this high school, is no longer this white school. It is a school of multicultural ethnicity. We have Asians, we have blacks, we have biracial children who are being born because people understand that racism is bad, okay? And let's be real about that, we all know that, okay? But the fact remains is this community, Orleans, okay, I can only speak from that example, Orleans is no longer the white bread community it used to be. We are out there. We exist. I'm so lucky I was able to have these friends and have parents who understood that there was nothing wrong with going over to a Black person's house and having a good time. There was nothing wrong with having these interactions with these people. And now we're out there. We are no longer the minority in these schools. I guarantee you, if you went to visit St. Peter's today, you would be shocked as a person who is not of color, okay, at the change of that school.
That's my neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's my neighborhood now. Yeah. Building on that question initially, like what can we do? Also, as it pertains to the private sector, I'm sure the public sector as well, of course. When we have diversity and inclusion initiatives, you have to ask yourself what your intentions are. Are you doing it because it's what's trending right now? Or is this the direction that you want to take your organization? Because if you are really committed to diversity and inclusion programs, you gotta be all in. It cannot just be symbolic gestures.
Can't be the NHL.
Because
it can't be the NHL.
yeah, because at the end of the day, a lot of this discourse is caused by the lack of familiarity, right? If I can't speak your language, it's going to be hard to relate to you, right? But if we're speaking the same language, now we can have a conversation, right? So if you're really getting to know me, right, understanding what inclusion means, it means that you're going to understand now some of my cultural nuances, the way that I understand yours, right? And then the more you learn about me, the more I learn about you, the more we'll likely find in common, right? Like, think about different ethnic groups that everyone enjoys dancing for the most part, but there are different kinds of styles of dance, right? But now when you see, these talent shows and whatnot on TV, and you got someone that's doing ballet, and then all of a sudden they're able to transition into like hip hop or, whatever modern dance is. I'm not a subject matter specialist, so, don't take me on and quote me on all that. But it's a beautiful thing, because then you can see that there's beauty and there's something to be enjoyed by that union of different styles of dance. And I think that back to D&I initiatives in the workplace, you gotta mean it, because we're gonna be able to grow stronger as a community when we embrace everyone's differences, and then kind of assimilate that into what is now the collage that is Canada, and all the different faces and backgrounds that we have. It can be a very beautiful thing. In fact, I think when you look at immigration here in Canada, I think our economic growth is literally dependent on new admissions to Canada. It's dependent. Our growth, us getting better economically as a country, depends on us getting people from other countries to come in and contribute to our economy. So we shouldn't be looking at newcomers or people who look different from us as a threat. Those are allies. It's reinforcements. They're making us stronger. We need to understand that.
All right, thank you very much. I did have a couple more questions, but we're running kind of overtime. This has been a very robust conversation. Here's the last question that I'm gonna place before us. What are the key changes that are needed for the Black community today? We do have a link that someone has posted in the chat that is a valid link that if you want, you can click on it to be able to go and register to give some feedback about needed services that matter to the Black community. It's called Ottawa Budget 2021, and it's https://bit.ly, and just go ahead. It's a valid link. There's more to the link than that. I can copy it, and those of you who aren't on, if you'd like, we can try and send it to you so that you can go and make that feedback. But I'd like us to wrap this up with identifying We've already said, yes, we want to see changes when it comes to educating the police so that they become more community friendly and understand the community that they're working with. We want to see more Black police officers, both male and female, I think. What else do we need in addition to that? What other changes? We know we want changes in the educational system. I'll jump up and I'll say, hey, we need more Black educators. We need more visible minority educators. Is there any other key points that we want to push home and say, we need more of this? Funding needs to be given to this definitive section.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know what?
If I
We're all on the
may.
same frequency here, and we need to be less hostile to each other within our communities.
Yes.
And then if we point that microscope at the visible minority communities, we have to assume a little bit more accountability as well. So that whole, this may be an unpopular opinion here, but this whole light skin, dark skin narrative needs to stop. It really has to stop, because we're hearing about how it affects people that are biracial, people that are dark skinned, right? Talking about the first person in school to be called the N-word, et cetera. And it's just, we need to understand the history of it, right? As an educator, we understand the importance of history. And that stems from slave culture, right? If you can divide two, if you can create two subgroups within a group that you're already oppressing, and you can trick them into thinking that one has more value over another for whatever reason, then those two aren't going to have that conversation that's going to allow them to be aware of the threats to their well-being. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because, we got Instagram, we got Twitter, we got TikTok, all that good stuff, which is fine. But to the younger audience out there that use those platforms, you have to understand that every time you retweet or post an Instagram post, like whatever it is, that perpetuates that narrative, what you're doing is you're just you're just continuing the divide. We don't need that. We absolutely don't need that. And this is the unpopular, I'll let you jump in. The unpopular opinion that I was going to say real quick is, if you are tuning in because you're against systemic racism, you got to hold yourself accountable. Understand that I'm a fan of rap music, but a lot of that rap sometimes, puts out messaging that encourages drug use, drug selling, violence, things that destroy our communities, okay? Now, I'm not saying that's the reason why there's systemic racism, but I don't want to, if we're here to fight it, I don't want to contribute to it. So leave that stuff behind. Really listen to what you're hearing and understand what is being told to you, what is being programmed into you, right? So it's hypocritical to say that you're going to fight against systemic racism if you're contributing to it by consuming that kind of entertainment that perpetuates those stereotypes.
Yeah, so the generation before me, I grew up listening to things like, oh, Caribbean people are like this, or African Americans are like that. So what we call it the diaspora wars. So it's tied to this colorism thing. How can we divide ourselves amongst, or throughout the diaspora, and let's keep ourselves divided. I noticed it reignite around this whole SARS situation. And again, online, all you see is people, well, Africans say this, or Africans come and do this, or Caribbean people say this, and so on and so forth. And it's just divisive, and it gets in the way of, the progress that actually needs to happen. If you're busy fighting each other over what you think the other person is saying or not saying, it's a waste of time. And our generation is cool. Like, to me, black is black. I'm not concerned about Zimbabwe or Jamaica or, whoever. So that's.
I appreciate you saying that black is black and all that stuff, and I really respect that. But the reality is, myself as a biracial person did not encounter these things. The amount of times I've had to prove to someone darker skinned than me of my blackness has happened way too many times that I can count. I don't feel like I should have to prove how black I am to people, because the reality is that's all I know. All I've known growing up is to be proud of being South African, be proud of somebody, a father, a grandfather, grandparents who escaped an oppressive racist regime system to come here to Canada to have a better life. And then I'm told when I get here, and my parents are told when they get here, well, you're not black enough. You're white. So this is exactly what we're talking about, that divisiveness. It's tough. We want that unity. We all here are having this discussion because we want that unity as a black diaspora, as you just said. I'm sick of hearing you're not black enough, or you're too white, or you're the light skin and you're the dark skin. We're done with that. We're done with that. It's over. We are black, well, we are proud.
You're people.
Yeah. You want to be unified, but look at it this way too. How many times, because I do this, I'm a victim of it too, I'll be walking down the street and I see another black person from a distance and you instantly get defensive. Like, why is this guy staring at me? Wait. Right? That's your first impression. Like, hey, I'm going to say, what's up, brother? Like, how you been? How you living? How's your day? We don't do those type of things. I can see my white colleagues at work. That's the first thing they say. When I see another black person I work with, it's kind of like, oh, I got to work with this guy today.
We had this discussion at Tyrone's birthday.
So
we talked about this.
We also only focus on when it comes to like our kids and what they need to do.
You're next, Talia.
We need to start doing any kind of online stuff. Like we need to, you can be a lawyer, you can be a doctor, you can run your own tech company. We need to start teaching them these things instead of you're going to make it if you're an athlete or a rapper, or you need to be some sort of public figure, right? These are just things that need to be involved. It's like I look at it with OPS and their community involvement in lower income areas is a basketball team.
Be more than a Facebook.
Why are we a basketball team? Is that the only thing that we can do?
No, don't get me wrong. Do we like
it's great.
We love the basketball team. But the reality is we're more than a basketball team.
Exactly.
You see it right here. We're educators. Okay, we're people that work blue collar and white collar jobs. We're in our communities. We're in Ottawa. And
I enjoy creative writing.
Absolutely. Like, just because we all played sports doesn't mean we don't all have other passions. I like music. I do arts. My father was an artist. He's a photographer. These are all things that we contribute to. And we want to be known now as a unified front, as something other than the athletes, the influencers, and the girls who twerk on TikTok. We're done with that.
Right. Talia has wanted to contribute. So go ahead, Talia.
Being the only woman in the panel. I'm so proud to see my black men speak up and talk and express their experiences, and it's fantastic. I think in talking about some solutions, just again, I didn't really indulge in my experiences with racism. I've had plenty, but I think with my background, I worked on it for Native reservation in Southern California. And it took some time for me to earn trust within that community. My responsibilities within that community was to assist in teaching about family violence, assist in teaching about anger management, and all of those things. And I came into that environment thinking I knew everything. What I didn't realize is I was not a Native. I had no idea what it was like to be a Native woman. I had no idea what it was like to be a Native American. And I needed to learn that. I needed to understand that in its fullest. And I think part of that solution that we need is the training, that cultural competency, or that understanding of what it is to be Black, what it is to be a Black woman, a Black man, having those open discussions. A lot of the things that I've been asked, even family members, I mentioned earlier, I have white family members, there's questions they want to ask, and they're afraid to ask them because they're afraid of the attitude that might come with asking those questions. But I learned that you have to ask those questions, and people who you're asking those questions also need to learn to be patient and receptive to those questions. And I think that if we are able to answer those hard questions without bitterness, we can learn a lot. We can learn a lot about each other. Having those open discussions like we're doing now, but really getting into those questions that people have would just, it helps a lot. I found that it made my job easier. Opening up the conversation with, I'm not trying to disrespect you, but please help me understand why this is the way it is. Please help me understand why you feel the way you feel. Because I was curious and I really needed to know. I wasn't trying to offend. I just really wanted to know. So I think we really need to be open to answer those questions. And I think people should be really open to ask those questions.
I hear you.
Instead of getting into the prejudice that we have when it comes to other races.
All right, thank you, Talia.
I think there's a huge delay because there's a dead silence.
You have a little bit of a lag, but I think I understood.
Like
yes,
really quiet.
yes,
It
yes.
just like shut the whole crowd up.
No, I heard you, Talia. We heard you. We got you.
It got really quiet.
So
sorry, out my mouth.
All right, Dante. The panelists on the floor with Martin Luther King got their say, same with Miss Talia. Let me ask you real quick, is there something you want to add just before we close this out?
No, I think overall the panelists did a good job about touching on everything. I think it just a little bit, there was some questions about how people can get, like what we can do besides defund the police and keep talking about this, like what we can do in the communities. For me per se, I just think there should be more initiatives, whether it is getting people educated, mental health. I can say for me, for example, I think I'm speaking from Calgary. I don't know Ottawa too well, but I think they're very similar cities. Calgary, I know there's a lot more opportunities for kids in wealthier neighborhoods. And I can say this from, I coach youth football right now, and I have a lot of kids I'm trying to get to university, whether that be from, getting tutors or extra help on their with their schoolwork, or even just good places where they can go to study. The people in these better neighborhoods, and even the school that I went to, we got a lot more help, and it's a lot easier to want to be motivated to make yourself better. I feel like, this is something, whether we really need to be hard on our cities to put monies into these communities and give these kids better opportunities. Because the fact of the matter is, even myself, I got friends that, I grew up with and played football with, and we pretty much had the same path, but our trajectory changed. And I think a lot of that is just what the resources that I had just based off of where I lived. And you know, the schools that I went to, my school was a way nicer school than the schools were in these lower income neighborhoods, and a lot of those kids fell off and got off the wrong path. And you know, I think if we can put, you know, a lot of money into these schools and give them more opportunities, and you know, we'll see our people, you know, succeed more and go on and want to come back and want to be teachers. And you know, I think that's the start. So you know, it's good to talk about all these things, but we really do need to, you know, take action and start putting money into, you know, our neighborhoods and help our people out and give our youth, you know, better opportunities.
So we've come up with some very interesting, and I did try to take note of some of the good ideas that everyone has said. I'm going to tell you just a few of them. Less hostile to one another, more police training to deal with the community, more visible minority officers, teach more family values. And I think that teach more family values, it's not just about teaching family values within the visible minority community or the Black community, but it's everyone needs to teach more family values to their children straight across the board about respect and loving your neighbor and not being so against Black people or against this people or against that people. And then there's the cultural competency training, and we ourselves become more open to questions and to listen. That's very important. Talia said that. And then Dante just pointed out we need more initiatives for mental health and education, i.e. tutors and any other way we can help to bring forth education within our community. I think these are some phenomenal ideas. Panelists, you did an awesome job. You made my job easy. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, Councilman. I want to say your name right. Is it okay if I say Councilman Glen? We appreciate your joining us. And ladies and gentlemen, I think we went a little bit over time, but we also started a little bit late. So thank you very much for joining us. And we are looking forward to the next session. And I hope you all come back at that time. You have a blessed day. Bye now. One question, Miss Donna Dixon, are you around? Did you want to say goodbye to everyone before we shut down? I know you're there. Come on in, Donna. Come on in.
I'd like to thank Councilman Turvey, Councilman Roper, for coming in tonight. We really appreciate you sitting in. I know we did a lot of talking and a lot to discuss. We will be having a part 2, so please stay tuned. And some of the questions that did not get answered today, we'll try to get the answers back on the next panel that we have.
And there were a few questions that did not get answered, so we did run out of time. We had one per question. Pardon? Say that again, Donna.
Oh, and we'd like to thank Godspeed for letting us host at this location today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. You all have a good evening, and remember to walk in love. All right? Be kind to one another. Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice.
Love you, brothers. I see both of my brothers down there. Brandon, Denzel, love you guys. Love my mom. See you guys later.
Bye.
Yo, B.